Hi, I'm Dr. Felice Gersh, your integrative OBGYN, speaking to you right now from my office in Irvine, sunny Southern California, although we are expecting a lot of rain coming up this weekend. Now, I've been talking quite a bit about COVID and the vaccines. Well, today we're going to switch gears a bit, but in some ways everything is interrelated, and I'll show you how in another moment. Today we're going to talk about what is very trendy, the ketogenic diet. We're going to talk about the pros and the cons and my take on it. First, for those of you who are new to my show, let me introduce myself. I am, as I said, Dr. Felice Gersh. I'm board certified in obstetrics and gynecology and in integrative medicine. I did the 2-year fellowship in integrative medicine, finishing back in 2012. This was at the University of Arizona School of Medicine. So in my practice, the Integrative Medical Group of Irvine, I combine all evidence-based therapies, starting with the safest, always with efficacious, means on mind. Because what's the point if it's not going to work? So we want to combine what's efficacious with safety. That usually means starting with lifestyle first medicine, which is, by the way, is really what conventional medicine recommends as well. Of course, when needed, I will use whatever high-tech method or means is best, like whether it's pharmaceuticals or surgical procedures. But like I said, let's try safe and therapeutic methods like lifestyle medicine to begin with. Now, today, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about the keto diet, the ketogenic diet. And this is now widespread all over the internet. There are so many books about it. And I want to tell you my personal experience as a doctor utilizing it, because once upon a time, not that long ago, I was an advocate for the keto diet because I felt it would really help my patients who needed to lose weight, and to improve their state of insulin sensitivity. Now, it's an interesting topic, and there are pros and cons. First of all, let me tell you that women and men deal differently with the keto diet. Now, what is the point of the keto diet? Let's start with the basics. The keto diet is about a high-fat diet that's going to require the body to use fat as a source of fuel. Now, it turns out that glucose, which comes from carbs and proteins, a lot of people don't realize this, but proteins can be broken down into sugar. So proteins and carbs are the source of glucose in the body. Of course, the primary preferred source is from carbohydrates. Now, that is the number one preferred source of energy for every cell, every organ in the body, including the brain. However, the brain is equipped, as is the heart, but the brain especially, to use the ketone bodies, which are breakdown products from fat as fuel. Human beings are well adapted to live on nothing, believe it or not. That's what we call fasting. Humans evolved so many millennia ago when food was not always available. So we adapted to the environment that we grew up in, that we lived in. That means times of fasting as well as feasting. So when we feasted, we would eat all the food that we could. We would eat plants, we would eat animals that we killed, fish, whatever we could get. And then, of course, we got into farming, and then we created grains as a staple food in our diet, and other forms of starch like legumes and so forth, tubers and so on. So we would eat food was as much as we needed when it was available. And then our bodies were equipped to deal with lack of food, also known as fasting. So what would you do if you ran out of food? You would start using your fat stores. That's what fat, among a few other things, because fat is very complex tissue, but one of the foundational purposes of fat is as a source of fuel when we don't have food coming in. So all of our organs in our body are adapted to using either glucose or fat as a fuel. So the idea came out, well, maybe the cause of heart disease, this is going back into the 1950s, the cause of heart disease is high cholesterol. And that began the beginnings of the craze of low-fat diets. Well, that was a big mistake. I've spent a great deal of the last couple of decades of my career defending what I call the defenseless. So I've had to defend fat many times, like I've defended estrogen, whatever's maligned inappropriately. Well, it turns out that fat is not optional. That's why they call them essential fatty acids. Our bodies can't make them. We need to consume them. So we definitely need to eat fat. But as you may know, unfortunately, I think it was in the 1970s, they invented this really toxic poison stuff called trans fat. The thing about trans fat is that it was a stereoisomer. It was like a mirror image of what would be normal fat. And they thought, that's okay. It's like a mirror image. And guess what? That kind of fat would not go rancid. It would stay, like that's why they talked about you could eat a Twinkie in 100 years and it would still be just fine. Well, I can tell you a Twinkie, which they don't exist anymore, but any kind of foods made with trans fat could be eaten maybe in 100 years, but they weren't fit to be eaten immediately or in 100 years. So we do not want to eat anything made out of trans fat. But trans fat was finally discovered to be toxic, and then it even became a greater thing about anti-fat, and the people thought that saturated fat was the cause of all problems. So there was this great swing against fat. And what did they replace it with? Processed carbs. They didn't say, okay, don't eat a lot of animal fat. Instead, eat more carrots, eat more yams, eat more beetroot and rutabagas. I can tell you that's not what happened. Or make sure you eat more garbanzo beans. No, they said eat low-fat pastries, eat low-fat processed foods. And that's when the processed carbs flooded the market. Low-fat foods, diet foods are all labeled low-fat. Well, it turns out that was a huge mistake, and it actually escalated the trend towards diabetes and obesity, which is now basically at epidemic levels around the world and certainly in the US. So now there's the reverse. You know how pendulums swing back and forth? Well, it went from everything should be low carb, which often meant also high sugar, to now everything should be, by the way, I meant to say everything should be low fat, which meant high carb and high processed carb and high sugar, to now the reverse. So now we should have very low carb, low sugar, and high fat. So what I want to tell you is that we need fat in our diet, and we need a fair amount, and it should be high quality fat, of course, not trans fat, and you don't actually want to eat high amounts of saturated fat, which all come from animal products, but you want to have a little bit, but not a lot, which I'm going to explain. And you don't want to add sugar, processed sugar, added sugars. You do not want to do that. But the sugars that are naturally in foods that are there already, like in an apple, those sugars are combined with polyphenols and fibers and waters that make it very different in the way the body processes it than if you ate a candy bar. So we don't want to equate an apple with a candy bar. We don't want to equate a Twinkie with almonds or macadamia nuts or an avocado. I mean, let's make sure we know what we're talking about. So fat is not the same as every other fat, and carbs are not the same as every other carb. So getting to the keto diet. So it came out back, oh my goodness, quite a few decades ago, that people, particularly children who had non-responsive epilepsy, non-responsive to pharmaceuticals, that if you put them on a very high fat diet, and the way they achieved the high fat diet, which I've read about, it was at Johns Hopkins University, was by giving these children all high milk fat. So they would have cream, lots of butter, because it was very difficult to get a child to eat a super high fat diet. And what they found was that they could actually go get these children into a remission from their epilepsy with these really high fat diets. Then there was some research as well looking at certain cancers, particularly brain cancers. And what they found was on a keto diet, it looked like a very, very high fat diet that they could actually help with some of these cancers like neuroblastomas to put them into remission. That's actually been questioned more recently, however, as many cancers are very adaptable and can use many sources of fuel. The idea was that what you needed was to have a starvation of these cancers, and that the cancers could only use carbs like glucose as a fuel source. But now we know that is probably not true. The idea with the brain, with the epilepsy, was that these children had a genetic disorder of glucose transport. Remember, I told you the brain's primary preferred fuel source is glucose, but these children had a genetic disorder of the glucose transport system that did not allow proper transport of glucose into the brain for fuel. So basically, these children had brains that were starving for energy, and that was what was causing these unremitting seizures. But if you gave them ketones, you gave them fats and they could use the fatty acid products, the ketones, those could be transported. It's a different mechanism to transport those parts of the nutritional world into the brain, because the brain can use fat as fuel. So now you're helping the brain to have fuel, and you're replacing the carbs with the ketones, the fatty acids, and then the brain is happy and the seizures will cease. And they found that if they did this over a couple of years, somehow or other there was an adaptation and the brain could actually somehow transport glucose better. Maybe it healed. We don't totally understand this, but they could often wean the children off of these high fat diets. And the idea was for the epilepsy kids was to give them fuel for their brains. Okay, for the cancer patients, it was to starve the cancers based on the idea that the cancers needed to use only glucose as a source of fuel, and our bodies could use fuel from fats, and therefore we would starve out and kill the cancers. Now, there's still some validity to this, but my take on it is that we should go and have ketosis the way nature intended us to do so. Now, there are special situations like the ones I described, and there are probably others where a special diet involving very high fat makes sense, but not for the average individual. And I will explain why, especially for women, but I'm concerned about men as well. So the idea with being on a full-blown ketogenic diet, it's not just a high-fat diet. It's a high-fat diet that is so high that there is so little carbohydrate coming in that there is basically no glucose as a source of fuel for any organ in the body. So the body has to live off of fat, and it will live off of the fat you eat. And if you don't have enough fat in the diet, it will live off of the fat on your body, hence weight loss. Okay, and that you're basically starving the body of glucose as a fuel and replacing it with fatty acids and ketones, which are the breakdown products of fat that can serve as a source of fuel. So this sounds great. So why is it that now I'm going to tell you why I'm not an advocate? Now, well, let's talk about why some others are advocates. Because there is data that shows that when people go on a ketogenic diet, that's a very, very high fat diet. That could mean that 80-90% of all calories taken into the body are fats. That's not a diet that most humans would ever naturally eat, okay? And in the history of humankind, the only civilization that I have ever come across that has an incredibly high fat diet were like some of the Eskimos, because they ate a lot of blubber. But that is a unique population, and they adapted to that type of diet over many centuries. Now, by adapted, I mean the gut microbiome, the body's metabolism, and so forth, adapted to a very unique diet, incredibly high in fat. We are incredibly capable of adapting to a whole variety of diets. That's why we Homo sapiens have not become extinct, because we're so incredibly capable of adapting to many different types of diets out there. That's why you can't say one diet fits one person, or that we can always know the right diet for everyone and that it's a one size fits all world. That's why I like to do unique testing, looking at glucose responses and so on. But so I'm talking in general terms now. Eating an incredibly high fat diet, 80-90% of your calories coming from fat, is not a standard human diet. Now, what if you did that and you have basically so little glucose coming into your body and you have no glycogen stores? The glycogen stores, glycogen is the storage form of glucose in the body, predominantly in the liver and in skeletal muscle. But if you don't eat any carbs, you're not going to replace the glycogen as you use it up. So you're going to have a body that has almost or no glycogen stores, and then when you're not eating, you have nothing for fuel except fat. That's the idea. So you'll have to burn fat. This sounds so great. I can't understand why everyone who needs to lose weight or improve their insulin status, because after all, insulin rises in response to elevated glucose. So it sounds so perfect, which is why I came on board with the ketogenic diet right at the outset when it started being promoted. It's like keto sounds perfect, but there are some pitfalls. That's what I want to tell you about. Now, if you go on a super high fat ketogenic diet and you're always testing to see that you're staying in ketosis, which means that you are constantly burning fat, you're going to have to check and see what your ketone levels are in your urine. You're chronically burning fat. You have basically no glycogen stores, no glucose. Your blood glucose should then be theoretically quite low, but not subnormal, but low in the low normal range. So what is the problem here? Well, the good news is if you go on a ketogenic diet, particularly if you're a male, and that's what I'm going to talk about, you will probably lose a substantial or significant amount of weight. That's true. And there are studies out showing that you can improve glucose status, improve insulin status, that you could potentially even reverse diabetes. That sounds amazing. So why wouldn't you want to go on a ketogenic diet? Well, long term, by the way, many people who do lose weight on a ketogenic diet do so because the diet is so unappealing, because it's really hard, as you can imagine, to eat 80-90% of your caloric intake every day from fat. As I mentioned, in the children, in the epilepsy studies, they gave them whipped cream to eat. Like, here's a bowl of whipped cream, kid. I hope you like it. They would give them butter. They would give them bowls of cream, because like, where are you getting all this fat from? What exactly are you eating? So, there are people that say, put a tub of butter, and in a beverage and drink lots of butter, eat tubs of coconut oil. I mean, it's not easy to eat nothing but fat. There's nuts that have fat, but they also have carbs. They also have protein. And then, what are you going to do? Get a sirloin steak and just cut off all the fat and eat it? I mean, it's difficult. I can tell you, to sustain a diet that is a ketogenic diet is not easy, and it's not really pleasant for most people. But there are other issues, even if this is something that you adapt to. Well, let's talk about women. Well, there is a lot of data now that shows that men and women respond to a ketogenic diet quite differently. Men will lose substantially more weight than women. In fact, some women don't lose any weight. It's much harder for females to actually go into ketosis. Women are adapted for survival, and survival means that you don't go into ketosis readily, because then you are basically in a state of starving, breaking down your body fat. So women have adapted to having, just more resilience in the face of famines. We hold on to our body fat. We do not go into ketosis anywhere near as readily as men. So for women to go and stay in ketosis can take a much higher fat percentage in their diet, whereas maybe a male can get by with 75% of his diet being fat, and a woman would need the 90%. And so it's much harder to sustain a diet like that. So men go into ketosis more readily than women, and men lose weight on a ketogenic diet more readily than women. And in fact, there are mice studies. Now, I know mice are not humans, but mice are very convenient and very controllable, because we can't always control what humans do. So when they took mice, male and female mice, and they did a study, they found that the female mice did not lose weight well at all when they put the mice on the ketogenic diet, whereas the male mice did great. Now here in terms of weight loss, but not so great in other ways. What they did was they actually were looking at the liver of the male mice and the female mice. And what they found was that over time on the ketogenic diet, the male mice all developed fatty livers. Now that is a problem. Now why, let's think, why would the male mice on a ketogenic diet develop fatty liver, which is horribly unhealthy, and the female mice didn't really lose weight? So that's not what their goal was. So because of the gut and the gut microbiome, this is a big deal. When I first learned about the ketogenic diet, I didn't understand about the gut microbiome. Now, of course, we're at the infancy, but I understand a whole lot more. The gut microbiome dictates ultimately the health of every organ system in the body. It's unbelievable what goes on in that gut. So there are trillions of bacteria. They make metabolic byproducts from the fermentation of carbohydrates. Healthy carbohydrates. We're not talking about processed carbs, white flour and sugar and garbage and all that. We're talking about real food, whole grains like the ancient grains, amaranth, buckwheat, millet, things like that, quinoa, and beans, lentils, root vegetables. Those are the foods of our gut microbiome. If you eat a ketogenic diet, it's virtually impossible to actually get in adequate amounts of these types of fibrous foods to nurture and sustain a healthy gut microbiome. That's a very big deal. The gut then will deteriorate in terms of its microbiome. And you get a dysbiotic gut microbiome where you have the wrong types of bacteria. You also lose your diversity, which is so important. Diversity is key. You don't want one type. It's like a rainforest. You can't have a rainforest with one type of plant. That's not what it is. It's this incredibly complex ecosystem. You need a variety, a big variety of microbes. They each have their own little jobs to do. It's just amazing. So when you're on a ketogenic diet over time, and it could vary from individual to individual, what happens is you're starving out the gut microbes because you're not providing the foundation of their diet, which is fiber. And so they start to die off. But there are always the evil ones that are resilient. It's not like you're going to have a vacuum. You're going to have fewer varieties, but there are always some that can survive and live off of whatever it is that you are eating. But it's going to be the wrong microbiome population. Now, this is one of the reasons why people feel good when they actually start a ketogenic diet, because they are starving their microbes. And included in them, in most people, are a bunch of bad guys, because most people don't have the healthiest microbial population in their gut. So that's why there are certain diets that are very restrictive that people sometimes feel better. So even fasting, which is not a topic for today, but I'm going to go into this more, why I believe in going into ketosis through fasting, but I can't cover that all in one session with you. But when people go on ketogenic diets, when they fast, they often do feel better because they're producing fewer endotoxins, which are produced by the bad bacteria in their gut, and they feel better. The problem is when you're on this restrictive diet and you're not providing the adequate foods, the fibers for your gut microbes, you start killing off everything and you have a decreased population of proper microbial life forms in your gut. When they're not right, then you start producing wrong short chain fatty acids or none or other products that are toxins, these endotoxins. There's a direct link between the gut and the liver, the enterohepatic circulation. There's signals. The gut and the liver are totally intertwined. When you have an unhealthy gut, an abnormal microbiome, you're going to translate that into an unhealthy liver. So now, mice are not humans, and we haven't done enough data collection, but I have found that so often what happens in a mouse does happen in a human, and why would you even take a chance? But we understand the mechanism. If you starve out the microbes and you have an abnormal gut microbial population, the microbiome, you're going to have an unhealthy liver and you may have a fatty liver. So in essence, short term, a ketogenic diet can make people feel better because you're depleting the bad microbes. However, you're not nurturing the good microbes. They're going to be eliminated too. Men particularly can lose substantial amounts of weight because they tend to eat less because the diet is so unappealing overall, and they're basically often burning fat because they're really eating less in terms of calorie intake. They've shown that. And because you're eating less and you're maintaining a lower blood glucose, you may help the status of diabetes. Now, that all sounds good, but long term, you're depleting your gut microbiome. That is really critical to overall body health. And we can talk more about that because, once again, I can only cover so much in one session, but the gut microbiome is key to brain health, cardiovascular health, everything, immune health. So you're going to have potentially an unhealthy liver if you maintain a ketogenic diet over the long haul. And women often don't lose weight, but they're eating a lot of fat, and they often are eating very high caloric intake, which still counts, by the way. It's not just about what you eat in terms of the type of macronutrients like carbs or fats or proteins. It also is about calories. That's not the whole thing by a long shot, we know now, but calories still have an input into what happens to your weight. So a lot of women are now eating a very high calorie diet. They never truly go into ketosis and they don't lose weight. In fact, some of them will gain weight, but they're also going to have the ultimate long-term negative effects on their gut microbiome. So in summary, ketogenic diets have some benefit. Maybe short-term, there is a place for them in men more than in women, but over the long haul, you're decimating your gut microbial population, you're probably harming your liver, you're eating as well a very limited diet. So where are your polyphenols? Where are they? The magical sauce that's in vegetables and fruit that interact with our gut microbiome, even have receptors in our cells for these polyphenols. These are the stilbenes, the carotenoids. There's so many different polyphenols that we need. There's like hundreds, and we need to have great variety. We need diversity. We need fruits and vegetables. And we don't need a high protein diet. Only in the elderly do we need to start increasing protein, or if your job is to be a weight builder, But the bottom line is that you don't want to eat a diet that's really restrictive in terms of diversity of plants. And most keto diets, they can't include huge amounts of plant materials because they have carbs. So you can't stay in ketosis if you eat too many carbs. Carbs are good for you. It's processed garbage carbs that come from white flour, processed foods filled with chemicals and added sugar that are so horrible for your health, not natural plants grown in the fields that you then harvest and eat. Those are nourishing. So I have great concerns about this real prevalence towards keto diets. Now, some people are misusing the term keto diet, and what they really mean is a diet that includes healthy fats. So call a spade a spade. Of course I want to include healthy fats. I told you right from the onset of my talk that fatty acids are essential fatty acids. Fatty acids we'll talk about more. They're the foundation for many of the signaling systems in the body, the endocannabinoid system, the specific pro-resolving mediators that come from omega-3. These fatty acids are incredibly important for the body for a whole host of purposes. You can't be healthy if you don't have healthy fats in your diet. So I'm not talking about a low-fat diet. I'm saying you have to eat healthy fats, but you don't want to stay in ketosis. That is incredibly restrictive in order to stay in that state. So many people throw around the term keto and then they add other things into the mix. Keto vegetable, keto green. Usually they're just talking about a diet that includes a substantial amount of healthy fats. That can be fine. Okay, so we're not talking about excluding fats. We're talking about not excluding healthy plant-based carbs because they're the fiber, they're the nutrients, the polyphenols that actually are important for the health of your microbes and the health of all your cells in your body. So I'm not in favor of such a restrictive ultra high fat diet, and it usually fails for women. I have seen this many times over where women go on what they want to be a ketogenic diet. They never can stay in ketosis and they gain weight and they feel awful over the long haul. So I'm going to continue this conversation because we just barely scratched the surface. I'm going to talk more in the future about the role of the gut microbiome, different aspects of macronutrients, proteins, carbs, fats, the different types, and why they're important in staying healthy. I'm going to talk about the types of diets that I believe are sustainable for your body's health and for the planetary health, for Earth. So we want a diet that can be supported on this planet so we don't decimate Earth. So we're going to talk much more, but please think twice about going on a ketogenic diet. There are many other healthy options. We're going to talk more about fasting because that's the best and natural way to enter into ketosis. Remember, it's a balance. If you fast and you don't have fuel, you're going to burn fat and then you'll be in natural ketosis. That works much better for women. But in general, I'm going to talk about this more in the future. In general, men lose weight much easier than women. So we're going to talk about that. So if you and a male partner both decide to go on a healthy weight loss type of program and he loses way more weight than you're the female, don't be mad at him. Don't be mad at the world. Just understand women have more challenges in losing weight because we're designed to nurture babies, to be pregnant, and therefore our bodies are just better at surviving famines. We hold on to our body fat more with more stability. So, but there are pros and cons in everything. I'm a female and I'm happy to be a female. I'm not interested in being a guy, even if I could lose weight easier. So much more to come. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you soon. Stay safe, stay well.